Okie dokie. So today we are finishing off our kind of wine regions and wine manufacturing production things with sweet and fortified wines. Um, very important to note why I didn't call them dessert wines, and the reason for that is because, especially with fortified wines, they are sometimes not enjoyed with dessert. Therefore, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to be called dessert wines. You have dry sherries that are normally drunk before you start your meal, and then you have ports and things like that that can be enjoyed after the meal as well, not just with cheese. So they kind of don't fit that thing. So the correct terms to talk about these are sweet and fortified wines rather than dessert. Okay, so let's get started with basics. So sweet wines are sweet. Okay, so how do we achieve this sweetness in the first place? So we've talked a little bit about production of wines in general, what we need. So you need to have the grapes that need to be sweet, and then you start this fermentation, and that fermentation transforms sweetness or sugar into ethanol, alcohol. So if we want to retain that sweetness, we need to find a way to maybe stop that fermentation or retain that sugar in somehow. So there's a few different ways to do this. Way number one is natural sweetness. Way number two is stopping the fermentation midway through. And the last one is should be fortification, I think. I skipped something there. Okay, so by natural sweetness, what do we mean by this? So basically, you have some grapes that are naturally sweeter than the rest. Muscat is kind of the main grape when it comes to that. It tends to produce quite a lot of sugar even when it's just normally ripe. You can do a late harvest, which we've talked about with Rieslings, for example, where you leave them on the vines a little bit longer. It allows them to kind of over ripen. And again, you get more of that sweetness. You can use this noble rot. Noble rot is started by this bacteria called Botrytis cinerea. So you might often hear the expression botrytized wine or botrytis wines or things like that. What this basically means is that this little bacteria kind of punctures a hole in the grape, in the berry itself, in each individual berry. And this makes the water or the juice inside start to leak out. And as this leaks out, it concentrates the flavors within the pulp, within the meat inside of the berry. And it produces more sugar. And again, because of that concentration, it just produces more complexity, more interesting grapes. You also got the Passito style, also known as straw wine or Vin Doux, which is basically you harvest the grapes and then you leave them to kind of dry off into raisin-like things. Again, the process, the intention here is to get rid of the excess water, and this concentrates the sugars again a little bit more. And the last kind of natural way is by ice wine. So ice wine basically means that you need to freeze the wines, freeze the grapes. And again, this just kind of, because they are on the vines for so long, again, they kind of get dehydrated, and this, the freezing of the berries just concentrates against the sugar. You can stop fermentation. So there's a few ways of doing this. So if you use indigenous yeast, we've talked about this before. Indigenous yeast are great because they give a lot of character to the wine, but they can be a little bit unreliable. And especially with wines that are, or grapes that are high in sugars, it can often happen that the yeasts, natural yeasts, aren't strong enough to complete the fermentation. This is especially true for wines like Riesling in Germany, where the fermentation stops naturally at a certain level, normally around 6-7% of alcohol, depending on obviously the sweetness that it was there. So basically, they just struggle. There's you kind of kill them with kindness, if you wanna say it like that. Basically, the yeasts are overfed and they just cannot survive such an amount of food for them, and they die off, and it stops fermentation, and therefore you get a wine that is high in sugar, a little bit lower in alcohol. You can stop fermentation by addition of sulfur. So sulfur, as we know, is used for stabilization, um, and it basically, again, it just kills the yeasts, um, and it stops the fermentation. So, for example, how this works is you have a grape that could potentially produce a wine with 100 uh, grams of sugar. But yeah, if you stop it somewhere midway through, you're going to get 50 grams of sugar and 50 grams of sugar transformed into alcohol. Another way to stop it is with fortification. So fortification basically means that you are adding an alcohol spirit, normally quite a strong spirit. Generally, it's going to be around 95% of alcohol that you add to the wine. And this, again, kills the yeasts. We've talked about this. Yeast can generally only survive up to kind of 15 and a half, 16 degrees. Obviously, there are exceptions, especially in Australia. Um, but yeah, that is kind of the general cutoff point. And again, if you do cut off that fermentation with this alcohol, you will increase the alcohol above 15 and a half, 16%, and you will still retain that sugar that hasn't completely fermented. And again, because this spirit also acts as kind of a preservative, the wine doesn't go off. It doesn't go to vinegar because the alcohol within it protects it, right? So same as with a whiskey or a tequila, if you keep it open, it's not going to go bad, right? Because of the high content level, alcohol level. So this is the process here. The one that I forgot to mention was chaptalization. So we might have talked about chaptalization before in normal winemaking. So chaptalization basically means that you are kind of fixing the wine, either adding sugar to provide more food for alcohol or for yeast, or you're acidifying. So in terms of sweet wines, generally what we're talking about is kind of sweetening the juice. There's a couple of different ways to do it. You could just add plain sugar in. In the past, there was a kind of a more appropriate method used for this. They used honey, so they would generally just put a little bit of honey into the wine, and that kind of sweetened it up. Or in Germany, they have this thing called Süßreserve, which is basically unfermented grape juice that they add at the end to produce a sweeter style of wine. Now, chaptalization is generally not highly regarded as a super quality, but you can find some very, very interesting wines made by this. Okay, so this is kind of the intro to sweetness, and now we're going to go a little bit more into specific wines or kind of regions or things that are very important. So I just want to take a minute. If anybody has any questions about this, obviously we will kind of try to explain them a little bit more when we come to the regions. Any questions, guys? All right. So we're going to start off with Tokaj. I want to start with Tokaj because theoretically they were kind of the first ones to start with the usage of the noble rot, Botrytis cinerea, as we talked about. So how does Tokaj winemaking work? So first of all, they have different harvests. They have 3 different harvests that they do. There's a first harvest called it's just like a dry harvest, where technically they can make dry wine out of it. As we mentioned when we talked about Hungary, Hungary makes about 40% to 50% of dry wine. Sorry, Tokaj makes 40 to 50% of dry wine, even though it is famous for the sweets. The other reason why they do this is also in this stage, they pick the grapes that are going to be kind of the base wine. And I'll explain what I mean by base wine when we get to the Aszu method. And Aszu is actually the second stage of harvest. So a little bit later, generally kind of late October, is when the Aszu harvest starts. And Aszu is a method for basically Aszu are these botrytized berries. And Aszu is the most difficult one to do because they have to pick each berry individually. So it's not like you go into the vineyard and you take the grapes that look good and you just cut the whole bunch and put it in a basket. No, you need to take only the good berries, only the ones that are properly affected by the rot, and you pick them in, which means it's a very painstaking, very long process. As you can see, most pickers will only gather about 6 to 8 kilos of berries per day. Yeah, insane. To give you an idea, so normally it's a kilo of fruit per, let's say, liter of wine, more or less, right? So this is how much wine a picker can make a day. As you can imagine, this is not a lot. Um, Also, they have to do this Aszu harvest pretty much every day because today a grape might be a little bit affected, but it's not ready yet. Tomorrow will be perfect. So you pick it tomorrow, and then the day after there's going to be a new berry that's affected and a new berry. So it's a very, very long process. Sometimes it takes 2, 3 months. There have been harvest of Aszu even as late as January sometimes when it was a relatively warm and dry winter. Well, not dry, warm. Um, and then the last harvest is called Samarodni, which is uh, kind of between dry and Asu. Basically, they just end up picking whatever is left on the vines, and they take the whole grapes. So both the healthy grapes and the botrytized grapes. Now, Samarodni, obviously, you can make it into a wine as well, and there is a little bit of Samarodni around there. And it can be quite interesting, but generally because the selection is not as precise as it is with the Aszu harvest, it doesn't get the same kind of a claim. Okay, so what is the Aszu method? So Aszu are these rotten grapes, like I said, and once you collect them, once you harvest them, you put them into base wine to macerate, right? So that gives this it gives them a little bit more juice, and it also gives the base wine kind of this the flavor that comes from this botrytized flavor. Once you've done with the maceration, you actually start pressing the grapes. You ferment them and then you age them in oak barrels for generally quite a long time, sometimes 6, 7 years, depending on the style of the house. But yes, they can age for a very, very long time. Now, you may have heard of the phrase putoni or putonios. So what is it? So putoni is it's basically like a tub where they collect these berries, and it's a 25-liter tub. And the reason why they used to use this phrase is because this is how they measure the amount of sweetness. So, for example, if you had a base wine, which was 150 liters, something like that, the barrel, and then the amount of putoni you would add to that base wine would tell you how much sweetness is in the wine. So, for example, 3 putonios would mean that you've added 3 of these tubs, 3 of these baskets, so 75 liters of Aszu berries to that sweet wine. And in result, this would mean somewhere between 60 and 90 grams of sugar per liter. 6 putonios was kind of the most common one, especially in the recent years, because they've phased out 3 and 4 putonios. And it meant somewhere between 150 and 180 grams. They are phasing out that now as well. So in the future, you won't see putonios anymore on the bottles. But because they wanted to raise the quality of Tokaj wine in general, they've just set a minimum standard. Every Tokaj wine needs to have a minimum of 120 grams of sugar per liter to be able to be labeled as Tokaj Aszu, that is. The reason why I say Tokaj Aszu is because there is another very, very special wine that comes from Hungary, and this is called Eszencia. You might see it written with double S as well, depending on, again, who's the writer, but Eszencia this is the Hungarian spelling, more or less. So what is Eszencia? Eszencia is, so when we get to this point, when we press the Aszu and before or mid-fermentation, the weight of all of these berries just kind of squeezes some juice out. And this is called free run juice. It's used in other parts of winemaking as well, like champagne and things like that. But here it's being collected and it can produce this Eszencia wine. And Eszencia is incredible. If you ever get a chance to have this wine, it is absolutely mind-blowing. It has a minimum of 250 grams of sugar per liter. So do the math. That's, a kilo of sugar, a quarter of that, put it in a bottle of water, and you'll get the sweetness level that you get from Eszencia. Insane. it can even go up to 800 grams of sugar per liter. So almost the whole bloody bag. Insane. However, it is because the grapes, the ferment and harsh level that they use tend to have beautiful, high, fresh acidity. These wines don't feel as heavy, and they just feel absolutely beautiful. They are fresh, layers and layers of aromas, and it's just, yeah, probably one of the most iconic drinks you can ever have. Problem with Eszencia is, it is very expensive because, as you can imagine, it's the free run juice. So even from normal Aszu grapes, from 25 liters, you will get, let's say, 25 liters of wine. Um, Essencia will be maybe a tenth of that, right? So the first of all, the quantity is very low. The second of all, the problem with Essencia also is that they will often add it to normal Tokaj Aszu just to kind of raise the quality of the wine. So there's not a lot of Essencia out there. If you do find it, it's gonna cost you a few £100 to get your hands on a bottle. It's never filled with larger than 375 ml bottles because there just isn't enough. So yeah, beautiful stuff. Okay. Now, moving on to the other very, very important region that is also affected by the noble rot, is this one over here, Sauternes. And just to give you an idea of how the stages of noble rot look like, I've got this picture on the side, and this is pretty much the way it goes. So you start off with a normal berry, and then as the rot usually starts affecting it, it starts releasing this juice out, and this is what you end up with. So as you can see, there is no like moldy rot on it. There's no fluff. There's nothing bad on it. It's just literally like a naturally dehydrated grape. So really, really interesting process. Um, so who invented this process? So we talked about the Germans the other day and their Schloss Johannisberg and how the harvest was delayed. So they have that story. Tokaj has their story that they invented the noble rot, and the reason was that one of the ladies was afraid of the Turkish attacks and just wanted to delay the harvest. And then once they finally got to the harvest, the grapes were already affected. But the French obviously also have their story that they were the ones that invented it, but there are no major records for that. And there is a very strong reason for that because well, it wasn't the French that actually kind of invented Sauternes, it was the Dutch traders that we also mentioned when we talked about Bordeaux. And they were the ones that were looking for white wine and sweet wine making in Bordeaux. And because they were good traders, they were also kind of wary of the marketing effects. And they didn't want to tell anyone that their grapes are rotten because they thought that this was going to be a bad perception. So it is thought that wines in Sauternes have been actually made with the noble rot for much longer than Tokaj in Germany, Tokaj and the Germans, but they never said it because it was a secret. So again, 3 stories. We don't really know who was the first. My money is kind of on the Hungarians, but yeah, it could have well been the Germans or the French or the Dutch. Okay, so Sauternes is a region in Bordeaux, in the southwest of France. It's about 40 kilometers southeast of the city of Bordeaux. It was also classified in 1855. We talked about this classification of the Grand Cru Classés, and you might remember that I did mention the Chateau d'Yquem, which is the most famous Sauternes estate, and it was the only one that was classified at the very, very, very top. Unlike with the Aszu method, with the Tokaj method, they don't do any kind of maceration here. They just normally produce the wine. So the fermentation stops naturally. Generally, this means that there's quite a high alcohol content, a minimum of 13%, but most of the time you'll get Sauternes with 14.5% of alcohol. This botrytis flavor can often be characterized as kind of like a sweet, spicy, gingery, cinnamon. And in Sauternes, there's even this beautiful sage component. So very like a fresh herbaceousness to it. And that just kind of makes it stand out a little bit more than from the other wines. Um, so why is Sauterne so famous? Why isn't Tokaj as famous as Sauterne, for example, or why aren't German Riesling as famous as Sauterne? Main reason is because they have consistency. So what do you need to make noble rot? So noble rot needs very, very particular, very, very specific conditions to occur. Basically what it needs is, so because you're going to leave the grapes on the vines for a very, very long time, um, and you don't want it to rot, and you don't want the gray rot, you don't want the bad rot to form, you want this good rot to form, you need very, very misty, very wet mornings, and you need very, very dry afternoons. So Sauternes specifically is located next to two rivers. So we've got the Garonne, the big one that we talked about in terms of Bordeaux, and there's a smaller one called Siro. It's not Siroc, but it's something like that. And this smaller river actually comes from a little cold spring, and that spring generates water that is much, much colder than the bigger river of the Garonne. And when these two rivers touch, the cold and the warmer river, they form a mist. And if you can see on my photo in the back, this is Sauternes, and this is the mist that forms in the morning. So because of the two different temperatures, the mist forms, and this kind of wets the grapes a little bit. And because it's a continental or a maritime climate over there, you do get very, very dry afternoons. So the sun in the afternoon will kind of dry off all of this morning mist, and these are perfect conditions to form the noble rot. Now, the reason, like I said, why Sauternes is famous is literally consistency. Because of this unique position where they are able to form noble rot pretty much every year, which is really, really good for them. Tokaj is similar. They do have two rivers there as well, but the effect is slightly riskier or not as consistent. So they're not guaranteed to be able to produce it every year. Whereas Sauternes, almost every year they can make it. So yeah, really interesting process, and that's why not a lot of people are able to copy them. So while people will look at the rest of Bordeaux, and it's fairly straightforward to grow Cabernet or Merlot anywhere in the world, you need very, very specific conditions to be able to produce sweet wines in this style. Anyway, next to Sauternes, you also have, or not next to Sauternes, within Sauternes, there is a small appellation called Barsac. And Barsac is famous for being able to put on the label either Sauternes or Barsac. Funny thing is, most people will put Sauternes on just because it's more famous. That being said, if you do see Barsac on the label, definitely go for that wine. It is probably better. It's kind of like a Grand Cru within the Sauternes. Like even Yquem is basically based in Barsac. Anyway, other regions in the area, you've got Cadillac, you've got Montbazillac, that make much better value dessert wines made in the same style, especially Montbazillac is one of my favorites. That just, yeah, kind of, it's a quarter of the price of Sauternes wines, but very, very close in quality. Some of the most famous chateaux, so we've mentioned Yquem, also try to remember Chateau Rusec, beautifully done, and Chateau La Tour Blanche, which is kind of interesting as a chateau in itself because it's actually a wine school. So Chateau La Tour Blanche is famous for being a wine school. This is where all of the Bordeaux winemakers come to learn how to make sweet wines, and they actually have incredible consistency, incredible wines year after year. Okay, so any questions about the noble rot, Tokaj, Sauternes?
Yeah. It might be a stupid question, but is all, because I know the Sauternes and Tokaj all coming in small bottle, is all for regarding the amount of production that they have, that they come in small bottle, or because there is a concentration of sugar?
Well, a couple of different reasons. First of all, especially Sauternes doesn't necessarily come in small bottles. You get Sauternes in 750 ml bottles quite often as well. The main reason is how much wine can you drink? How much in a normal dry wine can you drink? Maybe a bottle, maybe two, if you're in that mood. But can you really drink a full bottle of Sauternes on your own, for example? No, you can't, right? So that's why we even, I mean, the concentration of sweetness is just a little bit too much. So generally, it's for serving purposes. You do want smaller bottles, so it makes more sense, you know, to share at the end of the meal less of the wine. The other reason is they can sell more of it this way because, as you know, or if you look at the photo, right? So this is a normal grape. This is the end grape. Look how much water is missing from this one, which means that there's much less wine produced. So the more bottles you make, it kind of balances out the effect of loss of volume, I guess. So that's also the reason why they would do it. But yeah, there's many. There's tradition as well. Tokaj is actually made in 500 ml bottles most of the time, so a different serving to Sauternes.
Thank you.
Anyone else, guys? All right, let's carry on. So there is another French style that is kind of on the out, I guess. It's not as popular as it used to be, and these wines are called Vandu Natural. So the doux means sweet, so kind of naturally sweet wines is the translation. But these wines are naturally sweet in terms of being the grapes, as in being sweet, but they're also lightly fortificated, lightly fortificated. Good word. Um, the most famous regions come from France, and these wines are generally made from Muscat and Grenache. So Muscat being the white grape, and I mentioned it earlier that being relatively high in sweetness on its own, and Grenache being the red grape, which again can produce quite sweet wines on its own, and that's why it can generate a lot of volume, a lot of alcohol for still wines as well. The most famous, arguably, is Muscat de Baume de Venise. So this is from Rhone Valley. But you have other muscats as well. You have Muscat de Rivesaltes, and there's going to be Muscat de Frontignan, and so on. There's a lot of Muscat de something, which most of the time will be a Vandu Naturel. In terms of reds, the two most famous ones are Banyul and Mauri. And guys, you should know Mauri specifically because we have it on the list. So it's a red, slightly fortified wine. Yeah, so the fortification here just happens to kind of raise the alcohol a little bit. These are not 20% alcohol wines. They will be relatively normal, 15 and a half, 15, depending again on the style and on the sweetness of the vintage. But yeah, they've got a little bit of sweetness. They're not as sweet as Tokaj. They're not as sweet as Sauternes. So yeah, just a little bit of different style. Also, one of the reasons why they use this with the Muscat grape is because we've mentioned Muscat before in still winemaking. It is a very, very aromatic grape. So you want it to keep that. And if you're going to use botrytis in a grape like this, that's going to cover up its beautiful flavors. You're going to cover up all these beautiful aromatic stone fruits and oranges and tangerines that come from the grape itself. So you don't want to do that. And if you fortify them, you don't really add any flavor to them. You just kind of retain that sweetness and you keep that fruitiness and freshness of the wine. So again, like I said many times, most of the winemaking techniques come down to the grape. You look at the grape, you look at its benefit, you look at its good things and its bad things, and you always obviously try to emphasize the good and counteract the bad. That's the idea. Okay. One other very interesting method, mostly popularized in Italy, is Passito. So Passito has actually been around for a very, very long time, even in, I think it was in Cartagena in the Roman times when they first mentioned it. And basically they harvest the grapes as they would with any normal vintage, and then they raisin them. They just dry them out. They leave them on these. So there's a few ways of doing this. You can put them on nets like this, and you can dry them outside if it's a warm year, or most of the time they will put them in like the attics, the warm, dry attics, where they will do this. You can hang them upside down. So there's many ways of doing this, but the base effect is the same. You just want the grapes to kind of dry out in the air. So the idea is to cut them off the vines. This will protect rot, right? Because they're not exposed to misty mornings or misty nights anymore, and it just produces this style. Fermentation is natural. They don't do any fortification. They don't stop it. It stops on its own. Again, because of the high sugar content, uh, it will either kill the yeast before they're able to ferment everything. Um, well, that's why, basically. The most famous Passito wines are Vin in Chianti, Recioto di Soave, Recioto di Valpolicella. So Valpolicella and Soave are both in Veneto. Vinsanto, like I said, most in Chianti. You can actually call wine Vinsanto from most of Italy if you wanted to. But Vinsanto is where it's most famously grown in. Then what else do we have? We have Vandu. So Vandu is just a French expression for Passito or for straw wine. Most famously, it's made in Jura. You can find some in Rhone Valley as well. Quite rare, unfortunately. But if you do find some Vandu from Rhone, it is spectacular. It's made with most of the time with Russan and Marsan in the northern Rhone. And again, because it's quite a dry area, over there, you can produce really, really serious wine from there, a lot of concentration. And you got straw wine in South Africa as well. Guys, again, we have the Trafford straw wine that is really, really good value. It's super cheap for what it is. Definitely should be in your arsenal of after dinner recommendations. In terms of flavor, so because again, it's a naturally dried process. There's no additional flavors to it. So again, it relies on its, it relies on the character that the grapes give to it. So you will get kind of like a bruised fruit aromas. You might get a little bit of nuttiness again because of that dryness. But yeah, a lot of that fruit character, a lot of raisin character. Okay, ice wine. Ice wine, similar to the noble rot, very, very difficult to make and only able to produce in very, very perfect conditions. So how does this happen? So for ice wine to occur, basically you need a normal autumn, days on average 12, 13, 14, whatever degrees. And then in a couple of days, it needs to go to below freezing. So basically you need the wines, the grapes to freeze immediately on the vines. And what this does is kind of protects a layer, it forms a layer around the grapes and protects them from rotting. But it also, because all of that water is now frozen, it is ice. Again, you get that concentration of sugars. So that's a really, really interesting way of doing this. And again, similar to this is part of the naturally sweet wines. You get a lot of that beautiful character, beautiful freshness, especially acidity is a very, very important part of ice wine. So you can't make it with just any grape. Riesling will most often be used, or Vidal, which is a Canadian grape, because they are both kind of high in acidity and can survive with that. By law, in Germany, you have to have a -7 degrees Celsius before you can start harvesting. And the harvest, by the way, starts early as December, but most of the time it will be in January. In Canada, I think it's even colder. It needs to be -8 degrees Celsius before you're able to start picking these grapes. It has to be in Canada. It has to be a minimum of 180 grams of sugar. So again, this is a similar style of sweetness that you might get from Eszencia in Tokaj, as we mentioned before. So really, really sweet. And again, it is balanced by the acidity. It is balanced by the freshness that you get from these grapes. But yeah, incredible sweetness. And again, incredibly rare as well, as you can imagine, because you're losing a lot of the water to ice. You don't get the same amount of volume. That's number one. Number two is, while in Canada, it can happen fairly regularly to make ice wine. pretty much anywhere in the world is impossible. Germany is a very rare occurrence that they can do it every now and then, but with global warming, if it exists or not, doesn't matter. The vintages aren't there anymore. So it's very, very rare to get an ice wine from anywhere else other than Germany. That being said, if they do make it, it is spectacular. They do make ice wine in Austria a little bit. They do make it in Slovenia. Hungary, I think, can sometimes make ice wine very, very rarely, but they can. But yeah, generally in Canada, you will get a little bit of higher alcohol because, so what happens with these ice wines is, or ice must to start with, because the temperatures are very, very low outside as well, the fermentation takes forever. Sometimes it can take even a year or even 2 years to completely finish the fermentation. And yeah, Canada is generally a little bit lower in temperature throughout the year, so this process can take longer than Germans. This also means that generally they will produce a little bit higher alcohol because the fairly constant temperatures will keep the fermentation going, whereas with Germany, the fermentation might spontaneously stop. And yes, this results in lower alcohol, but technically can be higher in sweetness. Okay, now port. We've kind of talked about port when we talked about Portugal and we talked about the Douro Valley, but we didn't talk about the fortified wine specifically. So the difference to other sweet wines is that they are made with proper fortification. So when we talked about Vandu Natural, in Vandu Natural, you will only do a little bit of that spirit, whereas with port, you do quite a lot of that spirit you add to the wine. So the idea here is to raise the alcohol. And the reason where they started was because of transports. So when they transported wine from Portugal to Britain, for example, the journey on the sea was very, very long, and the wines could go off in the meantime. So they needed a way of protecting them. So this is how they originally started. They wanted to fortify them, and that would prevent them from oxidizing, prevent them from going to vinegar, and it would preserve them so they would still be relatively fresh when they came to England or to Britain. There's a few different styles of ports. Ruby is kind of the most common one. Is just basically a normal style of port. You've got Tawny, that is one of the most interesting ones. This port is basically intentionally oxidized, so they just kind of leave it in open top vats, and these oxidation notes just start to develop the flavors a little bit more. You get a lot of these kind of nutty aromas, and again those bruised well, not apples, but bruised fruit aromas. So it's quite an interesting style, Tawny. It also comes in either in different age profiles. So you will have a 10-year-old Tawny, 20-year-old Tawny, 30-year-old Tawny, or it can come in a single vintage Tawnies, which will be called Colheita. A little bit rarer, but yes, generally Colheita can be really, really well made. It's basically a vintage port, which I'll explain what it is, but made in a Tawny style. You've also got white port. I did mention it briefly, but yes, not that famous. Made from all of these local grape varieties. You got Malvasia fina, that is kind of the main one. It can be dry, it can be sweet. Personally, I prefer the sweeter style. I just think it kind of works better. But the method of making is pretty much the same as with every other port. You just make a normal wine. Before the fermentation finishes, while there's still a little bit of sugar in, you add that spirit, and that just stops the fermentation, kills the yeasts. LBV. So LBV was a fluke. It was a mistake, kind of. And it kind of now became the most approachable style of wine. So LBV stands for late bottled vintage. So originally, the whole point of port was to make vintage port. So vintage port means that the grapes came from one vintage, from 1 year. They made the wine. They aged it for 2 years in barrels, and then they released it. And once you got it, you had to wait 10 years before it was really starting to show any character whatsoever. And at a certain point, they had too much of the vintage port, and they had to keep it back a little bit. And they left it in a barrel for much longer. And what they realized is that once they left it for in barrel instead of 2 years for 5 years, the wine was actually starting to show some of the character already. And this is how late bottle vintage occurred. Basically, it is the same essence as the vintage port, but it's aged for longer, which means that it's ready to drink sooner. So LBV, um, right now, I think we're seeing 2013s, 2014s, maybe even already on the market, and they are ready to drink today. Now, they're never going to be as impressive as a vintage port can be, but they're ready now. With the vintage port, today we should be drinking 1985 ports. Anything younger than that, is no point. You're just missing out on all of the quality, all of the point that port has to offer, all of that complexity and concentration that can show with a truly beautiful wine. So yes, you might see 2006, 2008 ports, vintage ports in circulation, but they're not there yet. It's a waste to try to drink them now, in my opinion. Obviously, everybody differs. Okay. Okay. Any questions on ports?
I have a question.
Yeah.
As we talk about all the other wines before, back in the other sessions, that we go wine that getting points, 99 on points or 100 points. Does port or sweet wine getting points as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. All wines. I mean, these ratings are not official, right? They are ratings by journalists. They're rated by publications, by wine connoisseurs, and they differ. There's very few wines, or very few wine connoisseurs will always agree on the style. So the idea of these ratings or these scores, is for you to find wines that you like and find a wine connoisseur that rates them similar to you, right? So for example, so Robert Parker was the guy that kind of started off with this, and his style of wine is generally a little bit bolder, a little bit kind of more in your face. So he is more likely to give 100 points to wines that are oakier, richer, fuller than wines that are a little bit fresher and more polished or more elegant, for example. So for example, Robert Parker doesn't suit me. I would maybe look at Jancis Robinson, for example. She has a different rating system. She does up to 20. So kind of like 18 and a half, 19 and a half, and 20 are the top wines that she does. And she is, in my mind, a little bit more into the elegance and complexity. So I would maybe follow her. So yes, and people do rate sweet wines. They do rate ports. So Sauternes, Chateau d'Yquem, I don't think it ever got less than 95 from anyone. Even if 95, it's very, very low for it. But yes, they're not official. It's not, written in a Guinness Book of Records. They're just different publications. Different people have different opinions. So the idea is find somebody you like, or find somebody whose style you match with, and follow them and follow their scores. And this allows you to kind of discover new wines that you otherwise might not have gone for. That's the idea. Cool.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. To finish off, we're just gonna talk about other styles and other important wines in terms of sweet and fortified. One of my personal favorites is Madeira. So Madeira, the island, is quite an interesting one. Kind of most of it is similar to how they make port, but they also intentionally warm and oxidize the wines, which is a big no-no. You don't really want to cook your wine, right? Unless you're actually using it for cooking. But they didn't have a choice. Madeira is an island. It's very hot, and they used to. They have these very hot attics, so right under a very thin roof, and this is where these wines are generally being cooked at. And this provides some beautiful, very complex, very oxidized flavors, and it makes Madeira incredibly suited to long aging. Now, I've had maybe the privilege or the bad thing that I've never had Madeira that was younger than 60 years. So that's why I know Madeira is amazing. I have heard that people hate Madeira, and I can only assume that they've probably had it much, much younger than that. So I definitely think if you do get your hands on some Madeira, try to get it as old as possible, because that's where, again, these aromas really come out. And again, there's a few different styles of Madeira. You can have Eszencia, you can have Malvasia, you can have Boal or Mamsi, not Malvasia. And it comes in a variety. It can be dry or it can be sweet. I really, really enjoy the sweeter styles. And again, yeah, very, very old, very beautiful stuff. One very important one that I didn't want to go too deep in is sherry, because it can be a little bit complex, a little bit complicated. But basically what sherry is like you see the barrel on the right. So sherry is wine, and instead of filling up the barrels all the way to the top, they generally leave a little bit of space in the barrels. So they leave space for oxygen to come in. And as this oxygen comes in, you have this crust that forms on top. And this crust is basically their yeasts, and this is called Flora. So what this Flora does is it protects the wine from oxidizing. Okay, so it oxidizes them a little bit, or it doesn't. So there's a few different styles. You can make a very dry. You can have a fino amontillado. This is why I didn't want to talk about sherry. It gets very complicated. Okay, simplify. So yes, Flora protects the wine from oxidation. If it's completely intact, there's no oxygen that's going to come into contact. But because it's yeast, it will add all of these brioche, bready flavors to the wine. If the crust is pierced in any way, if there is space for oxygen to come in, the wine will oxidize, so you will get a different style. In this case, it's called oloroso. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but basically means that you have a wine that has these bready aromas because it's in contact with the floor, but also has a little bit of these oxidative, nutty aromas. So it's just another layer of complexity that can be added to the wine. Very important thing about this floor is that it can only survive in a very, very small window of alcohol. So it can only survive between 14.5 and 16% of alcohol. So this is where these problems for sherry occur, because if the alcohol is not high enough in quantity, this floor will die off, and it will expose the wine to the aging, to the oxidation, because, like I said, the barrels are not completely full. So there's a lot of oxygen that comes in. Anyway,
is this Flora a natural, or is been added?
It's natural. It forms on its own. It would form on any wine. Even remember when we talk about Vin Jaune in France, it's a similar process that they do there. They just call it a different way, but it's a natural occurrence that happens when you kind of leave too much air into the wine. It's basically wine is trying to protect itself, right? So it takes the yeast that are obviously, these are natural yeasts that are inside of it, and they kind of bubble to the top, and they want to protect the wine from oxidation, so they can keep on working on it. Okay, moving on. Marsala is also a lightly fortified wine from Sicily, named after the port of Marsala, and it's most famously used for cooking. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like you say, I'm gonna buy some cooking wine from a box or a bag. Marsala is actually super incredible because, again, it has all of these beautiful nutty notes and nutty aromas that can really emphasize dishes. Chicken Marsala is very, very famous. Not tikka masala. That's a very different thing. Chicken Marsala, you get these, basically you reduce the sauce made out of Marsala to pretty much like a syrup, and it just enhances all of the flavors. Absolutely delicious. It can also be used in desserts, if I'm not wrong. You can use it in zabayone, tiramisu even, if I'm not wrong. Might be wrong. And the last one that I've probably mentioned before is Vandu Constance. So Vandu Constance is a little bit unique to the others. It is a naturally sweet wine. But what we mean by naturally sweet wine is it is somewhere in between the botrytized noble rot wines and the Passito style. So they leave it on the vines. It's basically a late harvest. but there's no botrytis because it's too dry. South Africa has a very dry climate. So basically you get kind of like raisins, but on the vine themselves. And once they're ready, then they pick them and they make them. They're made from the Muscat grape. And again, that's why you don't want this rot. You don't want any kind of flavor interference. You want the grape to express itself. And I think I mentioned this, obviously, it was Napoleon's favorite wine, even transported to him to the island, and apparently he was poisoned to death with it. There's a story about that. But anyway, that's it for today. That's it for the sweet and dessert wine. So any questions about this? Any one that I should have mentioned? Obviously, there are other sweet wines in the world. There's Commanderia in Cyprus. There's loads of wines all over the world. But I just kind of wanted to focus again on the ones that we're most exposed to, just so you guys get a bit of a better understanding of it. And again, that you can, what my point of all of these sessions is that you guys can kind of start to relate styles to each other. So if somebody asks you a question on a wine that we don't have, you can offer an alternative, right? So if somebody wants a Vandu Constance and for some reason we wouldn't have it on the list, the closest you would get to it would be a wine that is also a Passito style, okay? So in Passito style, for example, in M, we have the straw wine, the Trafford, okay? If somebody wants a port but doesn't want it to be too sweet, too rich, you could recommend the Maori, the French fortified Grenache wine that we have on the list. So this is what I want to do with these sessions. So just try to find styles that link to each other and that can help you out navigate and help the guest to get the experience that he wants, even if maybe we don't have that particular wine that they're after. Okay. So any questions, guys?
Can you so someone asked for a Madeira, we don't have a, for example, recommend a Tony as is oxidized as well?
Yes, why not? That would be kind of closest that we could get to it. Very good. You could recommend sherry as well. You could recommend maybe Pedro Jimenez, which is the sweeter style of sherry. If they wanted a sweet Madeira, if they wanted a dry, you would go for Amontillado sherry. Yeah.
Now, probably because I think I did receive a question like that 8 years ago. Is sherry as this sherry flavor because it's called as a sherry?
Very good question and often misunderstood. No. Sherry, the name comes from the English again because they couldn't pronounce Jerez. So sherry comes from this triangle in around Jerez. So Jerez is one of the cities. Then you have Sanlúcar de Barrameda and Puerto de Santa Maria, which are three kind of cities where sherry is produced. And because the fortified wine came from mostly the port of Jerez, the English started calling it sherry, as in Jerez. But no flavors of cherries whatsoever. The name has to do with the city. Cool. But yes, there is I've heard this question before.
Yeah, that's what is that. But sherry, does it the cherry flavor like?
No cherry flavor.
But you know,
quite the opposite. It's white wine. So as we've learned, white wines generally taste like not red fruits or blue fruits or black fruits. So it wouldn't make sense. Sherry's flavors are, most notably, you will get these bready aromas and you will get kind of like these oxidized nutty notes, sometimes saltiness or savoriness to the wine as well. But yeah, no cherries.
Okay, cool.
Girls, anything from you? Okay. So we are done for today. And on Thursday, we're going to have our last session and we are going to do service. I will emphasize it on Thursday again. The views on this service, the way we're going to do service on Thursday, are my views. They might not completely match what our company wants to do, but it's just I want to kind of spread the word of what I think is good service and what I think people should be doing. And we're also gonna I'm gonna decant a wine for you and use the Coravan, just so maybe if that was unclear how to do it, makes it a little bit easier. Okay, if you have any questions about service, make sure you get them ready for Thursday. Again, so we can answer them. Cool. The presentation is almost up on the website, and the video, as usual, will be a little bit later on in the afternoon. All right, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see you on Thursday. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.